An independent elderly woman moves in with her son, hoping to find care and peace in her final years. But subtle gestures turn comfort into pain, and silence becomes the price of coexistence, until her physical collapse reveals the truth hidden beneath the perfect facade. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching from. Continuing. Faith felt the pain shoot up her spine like a hot blade when she tried to stand up from the rigid chair for the third time that morning. Her trembling fingers gripped the dining table, her knuckles turning white beneath her thin skin. At 72, she had never imagined that sitting down could become a daily torment. Her son Robert's house was everything a mother could wish for. Spacious, modern, with well-manicured gardens in the upscale neighborhood of Oak Creek where they lived. When he invited her to leave the small apartment where she had spent the last 15 years alone, Faith felt her heart warm with gratitude. Robert had prospered so much in the technology sector that he could offer his mother the rest she deserved after decades of sewing to support the family. 6 months ago, everything seemed like a dream. Patricia, her 38-year-old daughter-in-law, welcomed her with warm hugs and a smile that lit up her delicate face. The woman was elegant, always impeccably dressed, and treated Faith with a courtesy that bordered on reverence. Robert watched these interactions with eyes shining with pride, satisfied to see two of the most important women in his life getting along so well. In the beginning, Faith had her favorite armchair strategically positioned in the living room, from where she could watch Sophie, her 4-year-old granddaughter, playing on the plush rug. The girl was the sunshine of the house, always running through the hallways with her dolls, filling the rooms with crystal-clear laughter. The orthopedic cushion that Robert had bought especially for her was always at hand, providing the necessary relief for her back, which had been punished by years of work. Clara, the housekeeper, who had looked after the home for 5 years, always showed genuine affection for Faith. A 50-year-old woman with features marked by life, Clara had the habit of stopping to talk during her domestic chores. She knew every corner of that house and noticed changes that went unnoticed by the employers. The first alterations were subtle. Faith woke up one morning and discovered that her armchair had been moved to a less privileged corner of the room, away from the window where she liked to watch the garden. Patricia explained with an apologetic smile that she was reorganizing the space to receive important guests of Robert's. The new arrangement would be temporary, she promised. The orthopedic cushion disappeared the following week. When Faith asked about it, Patricia furrowed her brow as if she were trying to remember some insignificant detail. Perhaps Clara had put it away somewhere during cleaning. She would look for it. She would surely find it. But the days passed, and the cushion never reappeared. The chair that replaced the armchair was beautiful. It matched the modern decor of the room perfectly. It was also incredibly uncomfortable. The rigid seat and straight back caused every attempt Faith made to settle in to result in painful spasms in her lower back. She tried to mention the discomfort, but her words were met with a look of exaggerated understanding. "Oh, mother-in-law, I imagine how difficult it must be to adapt to new furniture at our age," Patricia said, with a melodic voice that carried an almost imperceptible hint of condescension. "But the physical therapist always says that an upright posture is better for the spine, doesn't he? I'm sure that in a few days you'll get used to it." Robert always arrived, home from the office late, tired from long days dedicated to expanding his software development company. When he was home, everything seemed to miraculously return to normal. The cushion would reappear in the exact place where it should be, and Patricia became even more attentive, constantly asking about Faith's comfort. The daughter-in-law would massage her mother-in-law's shoulders, offer herbal tea to relax, and suggest warm baths to relieve tension. Robert observed these demonstrations of care with growing satisfaction. His wife was being even more dedicated than he had expected. On weekends, when he spent more time at home, he would even get emotional, seeing Patricia help his mother get up from the chair, offering her arm as support, asking if she needed anything else. Clara noticed the pattern before anyone else. She observed how Faith's comfort items systematically disappeared during the week and reappeared on weekends. She saw how the young mistress's expression changed subtly when she was alone with her mother-in-law. The mask of kindness, gave way to a cold, calculating look that Clara had never witnessed in 5 years of working in that house. On a Thursday afternoon, Clara found Faith leaning against the hallway wall, breathing with difficulty, her face contorted in pain. The elderly woman held one hand against her back, making a grimace she tried to hide upon noticing the housekeeper's presence. "Mrs. Faith, are you all right?" Clara approached quickly, extending her arms to offer support. "I am, Clara, just a little discomfort," Faith whispered, but her voice trembled slightly. "I couldn't get up properly from the living room chair. I think the strength is fleeing these old bones." Clara looked toward the living room, where the rigid chair occupied the place of the old padded armchair. Her heart tightened as she realized that Faith was avoiding sitting anywhere in the house other than her own bed. The woman who had once been vigorous and independent was becoming a ghost in her own hallways. As the days passed, the situation worsened. Faith began to spend entire mornings standing, leaning on the furniture, because sitting in the chair had become unbearable torture. Patricia observed these movements with attention disguised as disinterest, always making comments about the importance of staying active and how movement was beneficial for circulation. "You know, mother-in-law, I read a very interesting article about how people your age can benefit from firmer furniture. It helps maintain correct posture and strengthens the back muscles," Patricia would say while leafing through magazines, without even looking at Faith. "Sometimes what seems uncomfortable at first ends up being best for our health in the long run." The pain medications gradually disappeared. First the ointment Faith used every night before bed, then the vitamins Robert had bought specifically to strengthen her bones. When she asked about them, she always received vague explanations about cleaning, reorganization, or suggestions that perhaps it was time to see a doctor to reevaluate her medication needs. Clara began to discreetly document what she observed. She took photos with her phone of the cushion hidden in the closet of Patricia's room, photographed the tube of ointment kept with the mistress's cosmetics, and recorded moments when Faith was clearly suffering but trying to hide it. The turning point came on an afternoon when Robert decided to return home early from work. He entered the house and found his mother standing, her body trembling, leaning with effort over the dining table. Her face was pale, her gaze dull, her body stiffened by pain. Upon seeing her son, the elderly woman broke down. "It hurts so much. I can't sit down." The impact of the sentence was immediate. Robert looked around and saw the hard chair, the comfortless environment. When he tried to help, Patricia stepped forward with a rehearsed speech that she was exaggerating, that it was just part of aging. But his wife's behavior sounded mechanical, scripted, and Robert's unease began to grow. At that moment, Clara appeared in the room carrying a tea tray. Seeing the scene, Faith clearly in distress, Robert confused and worried. Patricia trying to downplay the situation, she made the most courageous decision of her life. "Mr. Robert," she said, setting the tray aside, "I need to talk to you about Mrs. Faith. There are things happening in this house that you need to know." Patricia tried to interrupt, but Robert raised his hand, asking for silence. "Speak, Clara. Your mother hasn't been able to sit down for weeks. Every object that gave her comfort was removed whenever you weren't home. The cushion, the pain ointment, even the vitamins. Mrs. Faith spends whole days standing because sitting has become torture." Robert looked at Patricia, who had turned visibly pale. "Is this true?" "Robert, Clara is exaggerating. Your mother is resistant to change. It's normal at her age." "Clara," Robert interrupted his wife, "show me where my mother's things are." Clara guided Robert to the couple's bedroom and opened the closet. There it all was, the orthopedic cushion, the ointment expired for months, the vitamins, even a bottle of sedatives in Patricia's name that Clara had seen being used to make calming teas for Faith. Robert picked up the sedative bottle and examined the label. "Patricia, why is my mother taking your psychiatric medication?" The doctor said it would be good for her anxiety." "What doctor? When did my mother see a doctor?" Patricia couldn't answer. There was no doctor. There was no prescription. There was only a cruel and systematic plan to make Faith appear senile and problematic, creating a justification to remove her from the house. Robert looked at his mother, who was leaning against the bedroom wall, and saw for the first time in months a look of hope in her eyes. "Mom, forgive me for not seeing what was happening." "You came home," Faith whispered. "I knew you would come back." That night, Robert confronted Patricia definitively. He presented all the evidence, all of Clara's testimony, all the systematic cruelty that had been documented. Patricia tried one last manipulation, using Sophie as an argument, but Robert did not waver. "You have 1 hour to pack your bags and leave this house." But the war was only beginning. Patricia walked upstairs with heavy steps, defeated but clearly furious. Clara followed her, fulfilling Robert's instruction to supervise the departure. Alone in the living room with his mother, Robert sat beside her on the sofa, carefully placing the orthopedic cushion behind her back. "Forgive me, Mom," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Forgive me for not seeing what was happening, for allowing her to do this to you." Faith squeezed his hand with all the strength she could muster, tears streaming down her face. "You came back. I knew you would come back. During all these months, even when the pain was unbearable, I knew my son wouldn't abandon me." Robert observed his mother's tired face, seeing their marks of suffering that weren't present months ago. Deeper expression lines, a gaze that carried the weight of someone who had faced silent and systematic cruelty. "Mom, how could I have been so blind? How did I not realize that the woman I was married to was capable of torturing the person I love most in the world?" "Robert, people like Patricia are experts in manipulation. She built a perfect facade for you and showed her true face only to me. Even I, during the most difficult moments, began to doubt myself." Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, awakened by the sound of the raised voices. The 4-year-old girl descended slowly, confused by the tension hanging in the house. "Daddy? Why is Mommy making noise up there? Why is Grandma crying?" Robert opened his arms and Sophie ran to him. "Mommy needs to go away for a while, sweetheart. She wasn't being kind to Grandma." "But why doesn't Mommy like Grandma? Grandma is good." The child's innocent question cut deep into Robert's heart. Even Sophie, at 4 years old, had realized something was wrong. Upstairs, while packing her bags under Clara's supervision, Patricia made one last vengeful decision. Her original plan had failed, but she still had cards to play. If she couldn't have the family she wanted, she would ensure Robert paid the highest price possible for kicking her out. "Clara," she said while folding clothes with jerky, "movements. You think you won, don't you? You think you saved your little darling?" Clara remained silent but kept her eyes fixed on Patricia. "You have no idea what you just triggered. Robert may have kicked me out today, but this is far from over." Patricia picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Child Protective Services. I need to make an urgent report about a child at risk." Clara felt her blood run cold upon hearing the first words of the call. The call was to the Regional Child Protective Services. With a trembling voice and very well rehearsed, tears, she told a carefully constructed story. Her husband had become violent and unstable after discovering she questioned the inadequate methods of care for her elderly mother-in-law. She claimed that Robert physically assaulted her when she tried to protect his mother from excessive medication, and that she now feared for the safety of her 4-year-old daughter. "My husband is completely out of his mind," she sobbed into the phone. "He chose the delusions of a senile woman over the safety of his own family. I'm being forced to leave the house this very night for fear that he will hurt me in front of our daughter." Clara watched Patricia's performance with a mixture of horror and admiration for the woman's manipulative skill. Every word was calculated to create the image of a dedicated wife being punished for trying to do the right thing. Patricia also called 3 influential neighbors, telling slightly different versions of the same story. To the neighbor on the corner, she said Robert had discovered she questioned excessive spending on medication for his mother and turned violent. To the neighbor next door, she claimed she had suggested professional care for the elderly woman, and Robert attacked her physically. To the third neighbor, she said she caught Robert forcing his mother to take excessive pills and was assaulted when she tried to intervene. Each version maintained the essence. Robert was violent, she was the victim, and Sophie was in danger. 2 hours after Patricia's departure, when Robert finally managed to help Faith up to her room and was trying to emotionally process everything he had discovered, the doorbell rang. Clara answered the door and found 2 social workers, an official from CPS, and to her surprise 2 police officers. "Good evening. We need to speak with Mr. Robert Miller. We received a serious report involving a minor at this residence." Robert came down the stairs still wearing his rumpled clothes from the day, his hair messy and an expression of total exhaustion. When he saw the official representatives at the door, he immediately understood what had happened. "Patricia," he murmured, more to himself than to the visitors. "Mr. Miller, I am social worker Mary Helen. We received a report that there is a situation of risk in this house involving your daughter Sophie and your elderly mother." Robert invited them in, trying to maintain his calm despite the anger burning in his chest. The social worker explained that Patricia had alleged domestic violence, neglect against the elderly woman, and risk to Sophie. Clara, who had remained close by, couldn't contain herself. "That's a lie. The situation is exactly the opposite. The one mistreating Mrs. Faith was his wife." Robert showed the objects that had been hidden from his mother, explained about the non-prescribed medication, and Clara corroborated every detail. When they visited Faith, they found her semi-conscious but able to answer simple questions, still under the effect of the sedatives Patricia had given her. After a complete inspection, the representatives took temporary measures. Sophie could remain with Robert under supervision, with weekly visits, and Faith would need to be examined by an independent doctor within 48 hours. "Mr. Miller," the social worker added before leaving, "I must warn you that multiple reports create a worrying situation. If more incidents are reported, or if your mother's medical exam reveals anything inconsistent with your version of the facts, more drastic measures will be necessary." Robert understood the implicit threat. Patricia had built a network of false witnesses who could be activated at any moment to corroborate new allegations against him. That night, Robert could hardly sleep. He went up several times to check on Faith and Sophie, feeling the weight of the responsibility to protect both while facing accusations that could destroy his life. Faith was gradually improving, the effects of the sedative slowly fading, but she was still fragile and emotionally shaken. "Son," Faith whispered when he entered her room for the 3rd time, "I heard the conversations downstairs. She's trying to make it look like you're the guilty one, isn't she?" "Yes, Mom, but don't worry about that now. Focus on recovering." "Robert, if my presence is causing problems for you and Sophie—" "Mom," Robert interrupted firmly, "you are my family. Sophie is my daughter, and I will not allow Patricia to destroy our family with lies and manipulation." The next day, Robert called the best family lawyer he knew and took Faith to a geriatrician. The exam revealed exactly what he expected. Faith had been medicated with non-prescription sedatives, showed physical signs of prolonged stress, but had no cognitive problems whatsoever. "Doctor," Robert asked, "does my mother show any signs of dementia?" "Absolutely not. Your mother is mentally lucid and oriented. What she presents are physical symptoms of chronic pain and emotional stress. With proper care, she can have a very good quality of life." 3 days later, Robert received a call from his lawyer that confirmed his worst fears. "Robert, Patricia has hired an aggressive lawyer and is suing you for domestic violence. She is asking for full custody of Sophie and claiming you are mentally unstable. Furthermore, she is trying to get a protection order." Robert felt the world collapsing around him. "There's one more thing, Robert. She is claiming that you forced your mother to lie about the mistreatment to incriminate her." It was then that Faith, who had remained silent listening to the conversation, spoke up with a determination she hadn't shown in months. "Robert," she said with a firm voice, "I need to tell you something I discovered yesterday while organizing my documents." Faith showed Robert a box with all her medical documents from the last 2 years. Inside was a medical report dated 3 months ago, exactly when Patricia had started reorganizing the house. "A geriatrician I have never seen in my life," Faith explained, "supposedly examined me and diagnosed progressive cognitive decline with aggressive tendencies. And look at the signature on the authorization." Robert examined the paper. The signature was a very convincing imitation of his own signature. "She forged my signature. She paid a doctor to create a false diagnosis without ever having examined you. Faith also showed photographs of herself in moments of apparent confusion, all taken during the days she was under the influence of the sedatives. Robert, this woman didn't plan this in a few weeks. She has been orchestrating this situation for months, perhaps even before she invited me to live here. The revelation hit Robert like a punch to the stomach, but it also gave him the weapons necessary to defend himself legally. With all the evidence gathered, the forged report, the manipulative photographs, Clara's testimony, and the real medical exam, they prepared to face Patricia in court. The custody hearing was set for the following Friday. Robert was visibly nervous, knowing Patricia was a skilled manipulator who could convince a judge of anything. In court, Patricia presented her version with a performance worthy of a professional actress. She was impeccably dressed, simultaneously conveying vulnerability and dignity. Her tears seemed genuine when she described the nightmare of discovering her husband was abusing his own mother. It was then that Faith asked to speak. The judge, impressed by her upright posture and firm gaze, allowed her to express herself. Faith stood up and, with a clear and determined voice, began to systematically dismantle every lie Patricia had told. She presented the forged medical report, the manipulative photographs, and offered details so specific and consistent that it was impossible to question her mental lucidity. "Your Honor," she concluded, "a woman who was a victim of violence does not meticulously plan the destruction of her supposed aggressor for months. A woman who was a victim does not forge medical documents or drug an elderly woman to create evidence of dementia." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Patricia had turned visibly pale, realizing she had severely underestimated her adversary. The judge studied all the documents, asked several technical questions, and finally made his decision. Based on the evidence presented, especially the questionable medical documents and the articulate testimony of Mrs. Faith, I see no justification for removing the minor Sophie from paternal custody. Robert felt his legs tremble with relief, but as they were leaving the courtroom, Patricia approached him with a cold smile. "You think you won, Robert? This isn't over. Sophie is my daughter as much as yours, and there are other ways to ensure she has a mother present in her life." 3 weeks later, when Robert began to believe they would finally have peace, Patricia executed her next move. She showed up at Sophie's school during lunchtime, claiming she needed to pick up her daughter for an emergency medical appointment. She presented forged documents and managed to take Sophie away. When Clara arrived to pick her up at the usual time, she discovered the girl had already left 2 hours prior. Clara immediately called Robert, who rushed out of an important meeting. Robert tried to call Patricia, but the phone went straight to voicemail. The police explained that technically it wasn't kidnapping. Patricia was the legal mother, and there was no court order preventing her from picking up her daughter from school. Robert's phone rang at 8 in the evening. It was Patricia. "Sophie is fine, in case you're wondering." "Patricia, where are you? Bring my daughter home now." "Our daughter is exactly where she should be, with her mother. We are in a safe place, away from toxic influences." Patricia's voice was strangely calm. "You have 48 hours to make a decision, Robert." "What decision?" "Either you remove that woman from our house and we go back to being a family, or Sophie and I start a new life somewhere else." "You can't take my daughter away?" "I can, and I will, if necessary. Sophie will not grow up with a deranged grandmother influencing her development." That night, Robert couldn't sleep. Faith also remained awake, consumed by the guilt of having become the center of a war that was destroying her son's family. "Robert," she said when he came down to the kitchen for the third time during the early morning hours, "perhaps I should sign the paper she wanted. If my presence is costing you Sophie." "Mum, if we give in to Patricia's blackmail now, she will never stop. If I show that I can be manipulated through threats against Sophie, she will use our daughter as a hostage for the rest of her life." It was then that Faith remembered something crucial. "Robert, when Patricia came here to try to convince me to sign those voluntary commitment papers, something told me I would need proof. I turned on the recorder and left it hidden under the cushion." With trembling hands, Robert took the recorder and pressed play. Patricia's voice echoed in the room, clear and cold, for almost an hour, documenting every threat, every manipulation, every admission that she was planning to use Sophie as leverage to control Robert. "Mum," Robert said, feeling hope for the first time in days, "this might be exactly what we need." But when he picked up the phone to call his lawyer, he received a text message from Patricia that made his blood run cold. "Decision made, Robert. Tomorrow morning, Sophie and I start our new life." Patricia's message arrived at 11 at night, but Robert didn't hesitate for a second. His hands trembled as he simultaneously called his lawyer, the police, and private investigators. Faith's recording would be crucial. In it, Patricia clearly threatened to use Sophie as an instrument of blackmail, providing the legal evidence necessary for an immediate search and seizure order. "Mr. Anderson," Robert spoke on the phone with his lawyer at 11:30 p.m., "she took my daughter. I have the recording my mother made where Patricia admits she is using Sophie as leverage against me. Robert, we will work all night to get the legal documentation. This recording changes everything. Now we have evidence that Sophie is being used as a tool for blackmail, which constitutes kidnapping even if Patricia is the mother." Clara couldn't sleep. She remained in the living room, holding a photo of Sophie, feeling partially responsible for the situation. If she hadn't confronted Patricia that first day, if she had found a more subtle way to protect Faith. Faith descended the stairs, leaning on her cane, still fragile but determined. "This is not your fault. Mrs. Faith, if you hadn't spoken up, I would probably be committed to a clinic right now. Sophie would grow up thinking her grandmother was crazy, and Patricia would have gotten what she wanted." Faith sat down beside Clara. "You saved our family. Now we need to save Sophie." The lawyer worked all through the night, mobilizing contacts in the judiciary, the federal police, and at airports across the country. The recording where Patricia admitted to using Sophie as leverage against Robert, combined with the forged medical documents and the documented pattern of manipulation, created a solid case for child abduction and obstruction of justice. At 4 in the morning, Robert received a call that made his heart race. "Mr. Miller, this is Detective Miller. We have a possible location for your ex-wife. Security cameras caught her at SeaTac International Airport with a child matching your daughter's description. They were trying to board a flight to Miami." "Were they? You mean they already boarded?" "No, sir. The flight was delayed due to technical problems. Our team is on the way to the airport right now." At 5 in the morning, when Patricia was trying to board a flight to Miami with Sophie, she was intercepted by the police at the airport. The operation was coordinated meticulously. Plainclothes agents discreetly surrounded the boarding area to prevent Patricia from noticing and trying to flee with the child. Robert arrived at the airport along with the police team. When he saw Sophie sitting on Patricia's lap in the boarding lounge, crying softly and clearly confused, he felt a mixture of relief and anger that almost made him faint. "Sophie Miller." An agent approached Patricia with authority, but speaking softly so as not to scare the child. "Yes, she's my daughter. Why are you approaching me?" Patricia tried to maintain her composure, but Robert could see the panic growing in her eyes. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. There is a court order for the immediate restitution of the minor to paternal care." That was when Sophie saw Robert approaching. The girl screamed, "Daddy!" and practically jumped from Patricia's lap, running into her father's arms with a speed that surprised even the agents. "Daddy, Mummy said you didn't want to see Sophie anymore. She said we were going to live far away because you liked Grandma more," she cried, clinging to Robert as if she feared he would disappear. "That's not true, my love. Daddy will always want Sophie near him," Robert whispered, feeling tears stream down his face as he hugged the daughter he thought he had lost forever. "Mommy told a very bad lie. Daddy will never let you go away." Patricia was detained for attempted custodial interference, forgery of documents, and obstruction of justice. During the interrogation, when confronted with the irrefutable evidence, her facade finally collapsed completely. "You don't understand anything," she screamed at the investigators, completely losing the elegant composure she had always maintained. "That old woman was destroying my marriage. Robert always put her first. I just wanted a normal family where the wife was respected." "Ma'am," the detective replied coldly, "you drugged an elderly woman, forged medical documents, used a child as a blackmail tool, and tried to flee the state. That is not the behavior of someone who wants a normal family. She manipulated my husband against me. She made him choose between his senile mother and his wife. The recording we have in our possession clearly shows that you systematically planned to destroy your mother-in-law's life, including trying to commit her based on forged documents." The full confession was recorded and became the final piece in the trial that resulted in her conviction. Patricia permanently lost custody rights of Sophie, receiving only the right to supervised visits once a month, a right she never exercised. During the trip back home, Sophie remained glued to Robert, as if she still couldn't believe she was safe. "Daddy, is Grandma okay? Mommy said Grandma was very sick and didn't like Sophie anymore." "Grandma is doing great, my love, and she loves Sophie very much. Mommy made up a lot of lies to try to separate us, but now Sophie is safe, and we're never going to let anyone try to divide our family again." In the following months, Faith's true healing began, not just physical but emotional. For the first time in almost a year, she could sit comfortably, take her medication without fear, and most importantly, feel genuinely loved and respected in her own home. Robert made important decisions that would transform the family dynamic. He drastically reduced his workload, delegating more responsibilities to a trusted team at his company. He promoted Clara to a house manager position with double the salary and full benefits, officially recognizing her importance to the family. He also hired a health assistant specialized in geriatric care to help Faith when necessary, always respecting her autonomy and dignity. "Mum," he said on a Sunday afternoon, while watching Faith play with dolls with Sophie in the garden, "forgive me for taking so long to see what was happening. If I had paid more attention—" "Robert," Faith replied, her voice firm and clear as in the old days, "you had no way of knowing. People like Patricia are experts in manipulation. They build perfect facades and show their true faces only to the victims. The important thing is that when you discovered the truth, you fought for me. You fought for us." Sophie needed psychological counseling to process the trauma of being used as a blackmail tool by her own mother. Child therapy, combined with plenty of love and patience from the family, helped her understand that it wasn't her fault the family had separated. "Doctor," Sophie asked during a therapy session, "why did Mommy say bad things about Grandma if they weren't true?" The child psychologist chose her words carefully. "Sometimes, Sophie, adults get scared of sharing the love of other people they love. Your mommy got scared that Daddy liked Grandma too much, and that made her do wrong things. But Grandma never hurt anyone. You're right. Sometimes people hurt others not because they deserve it, but because they are confused or scared." Over time, Sophie developed a remarkable understanding of the situation. At 5 years old, she already showed an empathy and emotional maturity that impressed the adults around her. Her relationship with Faith deepened in a beautiful way. The girl had learned that sometimes the adults we love need extra care, and that doesn't make them any less special. "Grandma," Sophie said one afternoon while helping Faith water the plants in the garden, "were you ever young like me?" "I was, my love. And do you know what I've learned in all these years?" "What?" "That age teaches us that what really matters are not the things we have, but the people we love and who love us back, and that a real family is one that protects each other." Clara, who had become much more than an employee, she was now an official part of the family, watched these interactions with tears in her eyes. She had been the first to notice what was happening, and her courage in confronting Patricia saved not just Faith, but the entire family structure. The house was completely transformed. There was no more tension in the air, no more hidden objects or unspoken words. Faith regained her position as the respected and beloved matriarch of the family. Her stories about the past, her accumulated wisdom, were once again valued and celebrated. Robert discovered that his company, far from suffering from his partial absence, prospered even more. His employees, inspired by a boss who put family first, became more dedicated. The investors he had set aside returned months later, impressed by a company led by someone with such solid values. During the legal process against Patricia, more evidence of her manipulation was discovered. She had consulted 3 different nursing homes, always presenting the forged medical report, and invented stories about Faith's problematic behavior. She had even tried to obtain a false power of attorney to be able to sell the apartment where Faith lived before, claiming that the elderly woman no longer had the capacity to manage her own assets. "Robert," Faith said, when they learned of the full extent of Patricia's plans, "this woman didn't just want to remove me from your life, she wanted to destroy me. Completely. Financially, emotionally, physically. It was a plan to erase me from existence." The revelation of the depth of Patricia's cruelty, ironically, brought a strange peace to Robert. He finally understood that nothing he could have done differently would have changed the outcome. Patricia was an emotional predator who had chosen his family as a target. Clara became a key witness in other similar cases. Her experience helped lawyers identify patterns of psychological abuse against the elderly and apparently harmonious families. She began giving lectures on warning signs that domestic professionals should observe. "What struck me most," Clara would say in these lectures, was realizing that Mrs. Faith began to doubt herself. A woman who had raised a son alone, worked 40 years, overcome all of life's adversities, was starting to believe that she really was difficult and problematic. Sophie, even young, showed surprising wisdom about the situation. Once, when a friend asked why her mother didn't live with them anymore, she replied, "Mommy didn't know how to be kind to Grandma. Daddy had to choose between people who really love each other and people who only pretend to love." The child's answer, repeated to Robert by Clara, made him realize that Sophie had understood at her childhood level the essence of what had happened. It wasn't about choosing between a wife and a mother, but between genuine love and manipulation disguised as love. Faith began to write her memoirs, not just about the difficult period with Patricia, but about her whole life. "I want other people to know," she explained to Robert, "that age doesn't automatically make us fragile or helpless. I want them to understand that sometimes cruelty comes disguised as care." Faith's book, titled The Rigid Chair, became a publishing phenomenon. She began giving lectures at universities and support groups, always accompanied by Sophie, who was immensely proud of her famous grandma. Robert also transformed. The man who previously lived only for work discovered that his true wealth was in the afternoons he spent with his mother and daughter, in the conversations about life and in the stories Faith told about the family's past. "Son," Faith told him on one of those afternoons, "Patricia did one thing for which I should be grateful." Robert looked at her surprised. "How so?" "She showed me how strong our family is when it is united. Before her, I took full granted the love you have for me. Now I know it's worth fighting for." The most important lesson everyone learned was that family is not just about blood ties, but about a conscious choice to protect, respect, and care for one another. Clara was proof of that. With no biological relation at all, she had chosen to fight for the Miller family with more courage than the daughter-in-law herself. Sophie grew up understanding that some people, even being beautiful and polite like her biological mother, can have cold hearts. But she also learned that when good people unite against cruelty, love always wins. Faith lived many more years, always lucid, always dignified, always loved. And when her time came, she passed away in her own home, in her own bed, surrounded by people who truly loved her, exactly as it should be. 5 years had passed since Patricia left their lives for good, and the Miller house had transformed into a true home. Faith, now 77, remained active and lucid, her armchair back in its place of honor in the living room, surrounded by the respect and affection she always deserved. Sophie, at 9 years old, had become an extraordinary girl. The traumatic experience of being used as a blackmail tool by her own mother had paradoxically made her more compassionate and mature. She understood with the precocious wisdom that some children develop after adversity that not all adults are trustworthy, but that made those who truly love even more precious. "Grandma," Sophie said one Saturday afternoon, while helping Faith organize old photos, "do you regret coming to live with us?" Faith looked at her granddaughter with tenderness. "My love, if I hadn't come, I would never have discovered that family isn't just about being together in good times. It's about choosing to stay together even when someone tries to pull us apart. Robert, now 50, had found the perfect balance between work and family. His company continued to prosper, but he had learned that professional success without family harmony was an empty victory. Every day he arrived home with enough time to have dinner with his mother and daughter, to listen to faith stories, and to help Sophie with her school lessons. Clara remained not just as the manager of the house, but as the silent guardian of family peace. Now 55, she observed with deep satisfaction how her courage in those dark days had saved an entire family. Her personal story had also changed. Robert had helped her buy her own house and enroll her son in university. Faith's book continued to impact lives across the country. The rigid chair had become required reading in geriatrics and social work courses. Faith received weekly letters from families who recognized similar situations in their own lives thanks to her courageous account. "Mrs. Faith," one of the letters said, "your story helped me realize that my mother-in-law wasn't getting difficult with age. She was being systematically isolated and humiliated. Thanks to you, I was able to intervene in time." Those letters became Faith's greatest pride. Discovering that her pain had transformed into protection for others gave a profound meaning to everything she had suffered. Sophie showed early signs of following in her grandmother's footsteps. At 9 years old, she already demonstrated a special sensitivity for identifying when someone was being treated unfairly. At school, she was known for protecting shyer children from bullying and for always including classmates who were being left out of groups. "Daddy," she said once, "the teacher said some children are naturally mean, but I think some people just haven't learned to be good. Was Mommy like that?" Robert stopped what he was doing to give his full attention to his daughter's question. It was a question he himself had asked many times. "Sophie, your mother, she had a coldness inside her that she couldn't control. I don't know if she was born that way or if life made her that way, but the important thing is that you always choose to be kind, even when other people aren't kind to you. Like Grandma did." Exactly like Grandma did. Faith had become the official narrator of the family. Every night, after dinner, Sophie would snuggle up beside her to listen to stories, some about the past, others made up on the spot, but all loaded with lessons about kindness, courage, and perseverance. "Once upon a time," Faith began one night, "there was a very brave girl who discovered that the greatest victories don't come from physical strength, but from the courage to do the right thing, even when it's hard." "Is that story about Clara?" Sophie asked. "It could be about Clara. It could be about you when you grow up. It could be about anyone who chooses to protect the ones they love." The relationship between Robert and his mother had deepened in a way that didn't exist before the crisis with Patricia. They talked regularly about important decisions, about Sophie's future, about plans for the company. Faith had resumed her natural role as counselor and matriarch, but now with explicit recognition and the respect she always deserved. "Mom," Robert told her one night, "sometimes I think Patricia, without knowing it, gave us a gift." "How so?" "She showed us how important we are to each other. Before her, I lived on autopilot. Now, every day I have the two. Our view is conscious and grateful." Clara frequently observed the family interactions with a discreet smile. For her, who had come from a broken home, the Miller house became the example of how family relationships should be, based on mutual respect, honest communication, and unconditional protection of the most vulnerable. Sophie began to show an early interest in law. "When I grow up," she announced at 8 years old, "I'm going to be a lawyer like the man who helped Daddy. But I'm going to protect grandmas and grandpas who are being treated badly." Robert and Faith exchanged moved looks. The child had transformed the trauma of being manipulated into a determination to protect others. "And do you know what the name of my firm will be?" Sophie continued. "The Comfy Chair Lawyers." The child's innocence in transforming the symbol of her grandmother's suffering into a symbol of protection deeply touched all the adults present. The years passed in a routine of genuine happiness. Faith maintained her physical and mental health, actively participated in family decisions, and continued to be the source of wisdom and emotional stability for the house. Robert prospered professionally precisely because he had found personal balance. Sophie grew up surrounded by love, security, and positive examples of how to treat other people. When Sophie turned 15, Faith was already 83. Still lucid, still involved, but physically more fragile. It was around this time that she made a decision that surprised the family. "I want to have a big party," she announced, "to celebrate our family and thank all the people who helped us during the difficult years." The party gathered over 100 people, neighbors, friends, Robert's colleagues, Sophie's teachers, and even some of the readers of Faith's book who had become regular correspondents. Clara was honored as the silent hero who saved a family, receiving emotional applause from everyone present. "I want everyone to know," Faith said in her speech that night, "that family is not just about blood ties, it's about choosing to love, protect, and care for each other every day. Some of you here are family by blood, others by choice, but all are equally precious." Sophie, now an eloquent teenager, also spoke at the party. "My grandma taught me that when bad people try to destroy our family, the answer isn't to give up. The answer is to love even harder." Faith lived until she was 85, always surrounded by her family who loved her. She saw Sophie graduate high school with honors, start law school, and become a compassionate and determined young woman. She met her granddaughter's first serious boyfriend, a kind young man she immediately approved of because he treated Sophie with genuine respect. When Faith finally passed away, it was in her own home, in her own bed, holding Robert's hand and being watched over by Sophie. Her last words were, "Thank you for allowing me to grow old with dignity." Faith's funeral was a celebration of an extraordinary life. Hundreds of people attended, including strangers who had been inspired by her book. Clara, now a respected elderly lady herself, read a passage that became the epitaph. "True strength is not in never falling, but in always getting up whenever necessary, especially when someone we love needs us to be strong." Years later, when Sophie became a renowned lawyer specializing in elder law, she kept Faith's armchair in her office. Clients frequently asked about that seemingly out-of-place piece in a modern professional environment. "This armchair," Sophie would explain, "belonged to my grandmother. She taught me that comfort is not a luxury, it is basic dignity, and that when we take away someone's comfort, we are taking away their dignity." Robert, now in his 60s, maintained the traditions that Faith had established. He continued having family dinners, continued telling stories, and continued treating Clara as a member of the family. His company had become one of the most respected in the region, known not just for financial success, but for solid, ethical values. "Daddy," Sophie said during a visit, already graduated and working in her own firm, "do you think Mommy ever regrets what she did?" Robert thought carefully before answering. "I don't know, Sophie, but I know that it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we chose to build a life based on love and respect, and that choice changed not just our lives, but the lives of all the people we touch." The story of the Miller family became a legend in the neighborhood. Other families sought out Robert and Clara, asking for advice on how to identify and deal with similar situations. The house that was once the stage for silent cruelty became a symbol of how true love always finds a way to win. Clara, even, after retiring, continued to visit the family regularly. For Sophie, she was a second grandmother. For Robert, an older sister. For the whole family, the living proof that moral courage can change destinies. "Aunt Clara," Sophie would say, she always called Clara Aunt, "if you hadn't spoken up that day." "But I did speak up," Clara would always reply, "because some things are too important to stay silent about, and family is one of those things." Faith's armchair remained in the living room, now occupied by Sophie when she visited, and later by Sophie's children when they came into the world. The rigid chair that once symbolized cruelty had been donated long ago, replaced by comfortable furniture where everyone could sit with dignity. Robert frequently said that the greatest lesson he learned was that protecting the family is not just about providing financially, but about being present, being attentive, and being willing to fight against any threat to the well-being of those we love. Sophie grew up to become not just a brilliant lawyer, but a woman who transformed her experience of pain into a life mission. Her firm specialized in protecting vulnerable seniors, and she always credited her vocation to the grandmother who taught her that dignity has no age. The story of the Miller family proved that when good people unite against cruelty, when they choose truth over convenience, when they decide to protect the vulnerable, even at personal risk, love always finds a way to win. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Faith, Robert, and Sophie has touched your heart deeply. If you were moved by Faith's courage in fighting for her family's dignity, by Robert's determination to protect those he loves, and by Clara's strength in choosing what is right even in the face of risk, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment most impacted you in this story. Every day, we bring intense narratives like this one, which reveal the truest side of the human soul, showing that real strength lies in defending our values, in the courage to face manipulation disguised as love, and in the wisdom to recognize that a united family can overcome any adversity. Faith's story teaches us that age doesn't make us fragile, it makes us experienced, and that sometimes it is the oldest people in the family who possess the wisdom and courage necessary to save everyone around them. We wait for you in the next episode with another narrative that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the values that truly matter in life, on the importance of protecting our elderly, and on how true love always finds a way to overcome cruelty.